Boris got some flack for that speech last night, of which more later. But in the last hour or so, the government's revealed it's asking the big six energy firms not to raise prices on the basis of government policies. That's until the middle of 2015. What should we make of this? Is it blatant conceptual thievery or something much more subtle? And how is the long march to May 2015 beginning? Well, with us to discuss, Danny Finkelstein of The Times, who used to work for William Hague, Olly Grender, who was Nick Clegg's head of communications, and John McTernan, who advised Tony Blair in Downing Street. Welcome to you all. John, this is just coming out. What we understand from industry sources that suppliers are being asked to keep bills on hold, and the government seeking this a commitment until 2015. What do you make of that?
Imitation is obviously the greatest form of flattery. So what we're seeing at the moment is the Tory party in two minds about what it wants to do. Does it want to go nasty, like Linton Crosby says, and go heavy on immigration, on welfare, on Europe, on human rights, or does it want to go touchy-feely and do payday loans and do this on electricity prices? It's utterly incoherent. You can either ape Ed completely, or you can go to the nasty end of the market, which is what Boris Johnson was doing last night. There's no way to combine the two, and it's really unclear whether the Tories think they're fighting UKIP at the next election or the Labour Party.
So odd, wasn't it? All that stuff about statism and nationalism and 1983 manifestos after Ed Miliband's
I thought I was going to agree with you, John, and then I didn't. There is a dilemma, actually, and I think the Conservative Party is trying to weigh out what to do. It's between whether to make the pure argument, we've put the economy right and run on growth, or try to do something about cost of living in the short run, which is very difficult. And that is actually a genuine dilemma, and clearly they've got to do something about the cost of living to head off that argument. It's a protective, in order to allow them in the election campaign to make the argument about deficit and debt and, Britain's on the right track, don't turn back. And I think it is hard, because if you do that, you look as though you're ceding some of the initiative to Labour. But the truth is, you've got to do something about the cost of living, because that's a large component of the sort of economic indicators that make a successful election campaign. So I think you're right about the dilemma, but it's not the dilemma you're talking about. I don't think there is Tories don't sit around going, do you think we should be nasty, or do you think we should be nice? It's just absurd.
But we saw the same thing earlier with payday loans, which was very much, what seemed like a Stella Creasy initiative, a Labour initiative to put a cap on prices there. And suddenly, Johnson ahead of his autumn statement.
So I'm not particularly in favour of what was done, but I can see the political logic of it, again, because it's about cost. And it's about cost of living, and it's also about trying to remove the sort of economic negatives that you might get. I think maybe cigarette packaging comes in as well. So you've got this dilemma all the time where you're trying to cut off the negatives, if you possibly can, without giving the impression that you're allowing the opposition to set the agenda. That's quite a difficult balance.
And also it's about anticipating what's coming up. And in both cases, on payday loans and on cigarette packaging, David Cameron knew that in the House of Lords he was going to get into significant trouble because there were Lib Dems who were going to move on both of those things. I think on the energy companies, first off, they've still got £1 billion that they haven't spent on all these eco measures. And, it's pretty disgraceful that they're still sitting on them. They've got plenty that they can spend. Strikes me as a reasonable thing to ask of them. But what my concern is, and I think this is where Linton Crosby might be right in his advice, which is not the nasty nice, I kind of sense what Danny is saying about that. But he is right when he tells David Cameron, stop getting dragged onto agendas of the Labour Party and of the media.
I wonder where this leaves the green taxes, or in inverted commas, the green crap. Does that mean that taxation for all the green stuff does go on to...
The elections are settled by not by sort of small political rows, but by very big economic forces. The Conservative Party is going to have growth running for it at the next general election, more strongly than people anticipated in the 6 months before and the 6 months afterwards. The question is whether it will have real disposable income. So it has to choose it's choosing to do things about what will affect real disposable income. The danger of doing those things is, of course, you see the intellectual initiative, you make Labour look more economically competent. But the benefit, I think, is greater. So I see the strategy, the need for the strategy.
And what's interesting, of course, is that people, polls say that they love the energy freeze strategy, but they don't believe it, which is really an Ed Miliband problem fundamentally, isn't it?
Danny's right. There's two frames. There's a frame of you've taken the pain and we've restored the growth, now you're going to get some gain out of that. Or there is the touchy-feely Ed Miliband, I feel your pain and I feel your pain at the moment, we should do something about it. The difficulty for the Tories is they're not sure which frame they're pursuing, and if you mix the frames, you muddle your message. If you don't have a clear message, you can't win an argument. You're right, the public's big doubt is, I like Ed Miliband's policies, will he do them? Which it takes the point that he's got to find a way of presenting and representing his promise on these issues. He's aided by the fact the government keep moving onto his ground, so he's allowed to talk about it. I think the Labour Party are failing at the moment in prosecuting the case that they're determining and dictating the agenda, and Ed's got to get onto that space too.
With Labour next time round.
Well, that's nothing that you can vote for. That's entirely down to the electorate. But, kind of what I think most of all is important for the Labour Party at the moment, and what I found extraordinary about the press release that came out today, it was, by the way, the press officer's nightmare press release saying, we're going to be bigger and larger and put some organisers on the ground. It was just the kind of thing that you kind of, you never do.
It's not David Cameron today saying, I've got a big plan, Emily. What's the big plan?
I know, but it is the very stuff, it's kind of the show me,
not a short-term
show me, don't tell me kind of classic mistake that both the other political parties are making, I think.
Look, if you're devising a strategy and you had to make this choice for the Conservative Party, I think you would calculate that you're unlikely to cede the intellectual initiative to Ed Miliband, because fair or not, I don't know whether John would concede this, I don't think people do think of him as a dynamic person who's going to implement all these things. Even if they're wrong, that's not what they think. And so therefore, I think if you're making that calculation, you probably think, I've got a big enough advantage to risk trying to do something about cost of living in order to try to neutralise that as much as I can and make people feel a bit better off. And that means doing something about it.
There's a tipping point. If they start to like his policies enough, that happens.
And there's a problem too, which is that David Cameron's no longer who they thought he was when they voted for him, and that's a difficulty for the Tories that they have to deal with. That he was going to be the man that saved the NHS, one NHS crisis, and that's broken. He was, let sunshine have the day, and whatever he said yesterday about immigration, that was not sunshine having the day. And so
that's not a big. I mean, I agree that it's an element. I mean, first of all, people, to be honest, people were never, absolutely blown away at the last general election by David Cameron, and I don't think they've not moved that far from that position actually.
Exactly.
So I don't think it has been transformative. But it's definitely, if you're devising a Conservative election strategy, obviously, I think a reasonable fixed point is that Ed Miliband has a lot of structural advantages and Labour has a lot of structural advantages, but Ed Miliband himself doesn't convince people that much whether he should or not, and therefore what you do is you try to
Olly,
take advantage
before
of that.
we're running out of time, I just want to come back to Nick Clegg's line on this unpleasant elitism of Boris today, which was bold conservatism, I guess you'd call it. Is he missing the point of Boris?
No, I mean, I think Boris is, as usual, Boris is all over the place. So, he's just impossible. It must be maddening for the Conservatives, Boris, because, kind of 1 minute he's one thing, the next minute he's the next thing.
Any
but
flack for it.
What he said in that speech
flack goes to David Cameron, George Osborne.
Honestly, I genuinely do not understand the row. I must be missing something. I do not understand the row concerned with observing that there is a disparity in the population. I mean, the whole point of social mobility is people have different talents.
Yes. He was not about social mobility. What he was talking about is if you're down there, you may end up having to stay there.
I don't think he really did. I mean, I know maybe he thinks that or something, but he did not say that in his speech.
It was the language and the tone of contempt for fellow human beings. That was a nasty tone.
I just really don't think that's a fair reading of his speech. I think that's what people hoped he said, or maybe, but it does not a fair reading of what he said.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much indeed.